Okay, I'm going to take it that I'm live. So apologies for slight late starting of the session, but it's good to have you here. So we've got three editors from publishers with us today to talk to you about getting published as books. So we've got Claire Tawney from Practical Action, Adam Swallow from OUP, and Helena Hurd from Taylor and Francis. So we'll start with Claire, and each of them will give a short presentation, and then we'll save questions until the end. So when we've heard everybody, then we'll have questions. For the questions, if you could use the question mark in your toolbar, not the text chat. So the text chat will be reserved for if you have technical questions you need to ask the technical team. But for questions to the publishers, please use the questions, the question mark. Okay, so over to you, Claire.
So it's great to be here, and just a little bit of introduction about myself and my organisation. I'm Claire Tawney, the Content Development Manager, and we are Practical Action Publishing. Our organisation challenges poverty through the global distribution of knowledge and technologies. Our policy, practice and research publications aim to stimulate discussion, strengthen people's capabilities, and promote sustainable change. Our authors include researchers who aim to influence practice, as well as practitioners whose insights can inform research. So if your PhD research and your idea for a book, through this you want to really have an impact and improve the practice of international development, then you should come and see us and have a chat. So I thought I'd give you a golden rule about getting your idea for a book published. And the first golden rule, my golden rule, is topicality and relevance. So if your idea is in one of those very topical fields that are getting a lot of clicks at the moment, and you feel that then this is going to be an area in which a publisher is going to be very interested in hearing from you. But of course, the subject area of the publisher is important too. However topical your research, if it's not within the subject area of the publisher, then it's going to be, the publisher's not going to be able to do a good job for your book. So do go on to the website of the publisher and just check out what they've published in the past and what they say they publish, to see whether it's right for you, whether that publisher is right for you. Try and bring out the relevance of your research. So you may, the question that you're addressing in your PhD might be quite a narrow one, but you need to be able to demonstrate in your book that it has much wider applicability. So your research may be on the effectiveness of biochar in water supply purification in northeast Thailand, for example. But you need to demonstrate in your book and in your proposal for your book that biochar is a viable solution in many countries, and at the community level or at the municipal level or in refugee camps, just to demonstrate that book is going to have a lot of takers in from a lot of different countries and is not going to be too niche. So test out your ideas on colleagues as well. See if you can have a chat with a colleague who isn't in your immediate subject area, and see whether in just a few sentences you can convince them that this is an important idea for a book, of great relevance, the sort of book that they might want to buy just to expand their knowledge, that it isn't too niche. So that's my golden rule, topicality and relevance. And I'd also like to share with you a pitfall. So a whimsical title, in other words, a title that might sound rather catchy or intriguing, but actually doesn't tell you very much about what's in the book. This can be a temptation for authors. So actually one of our most downloaded books recently is called Constructing Low-Rise Confined Masonry Buildings, a guide for builders and architects, which may sound dull, but if you're a builder and architect in this area, obviously when you find that title, you know exactly what's in the book and you're going to download it. And it's been very, very successful. So we all go by that Ronseal principle, that old advert. It does what it says on the tin, and that's what your book title should convey. So those are just the two things that I wanted to get across, a golden rule and a pitfall. But please do come and contact me with your ideas for books and journal articles. I'm at the stand most days. Be very happy to have a chat. Or you can email me on claire.torney@practicalaction.org.uk. Thank you very much.
Adam Swallow. I'm a commissioning editor for Economics, Finance, Business and Development at Oxford University Press. And I've got 2 points to make. And one, you'll spot a trend here, is a theme of golden advice. And the other is a common mistake. And don't be distracted by the slides because I'm just flicking to the one that I want. Your one piece of golden advice is to do with knowledge. It's your knowledge. You are the subject expert. You are the expert in your topic. And what I want to know is who you are and what qualifies you to write on this. That's what everyone wants to know. What is it that you're writing on and what knowledge do you bring to it? So you've spent all this time working in this field, in this area. You've got this knowledge and you want to share it. Brilliant. You're the expert on that topic. Now you need to start talking to a publisher. And herein lies an area probably outside most people's knowledge. What is it that publishers are doing to your work? So the first question you have to ask yourself is, who do you know that knows publishers? And this is probably your supervisors, it's some of your colleagues, it's people within departments. It's an opportunity that presents itself at conferences within the DSA. And if you start thinking about who you've cited and your references, and if you know any of these people, there you go. You've got a pretty good pool of knowledgeable people who are used to dealing with publishers. Good start. Because you're going to write cold to a publisher with this proposal, with this outline to sell yourself, the first question I'm going to ask is, who are you and what qualifies you to write on this? But if I can contextualize your work within the expertise area that you've got, if you're part of a network, a team, an affiliation, a representation, a body, and this and the other, we're already starting to see not at this stage, the knowledge that you possess, but the circles and where you operate, the teams in which you operate, the people with which you operate. And we're always looking for these new networks and teams. That's what we're all about. This is where the ideas come from. One new sparkling idea doesn't really exist in isolation. It's come up from a body, especially for more junior or first-time authors. It's come up from a body of collaboration that you've experienced. So what is it about the knowledge, your knowledge? What knowledge do you need of a publisher? Who's going to publish it? Well, you've read loads of stuff, but it might have been from the library. It might have been from 10 years ago. It might have been something my predecessor commissioned. You may not know this. I used to say, walk into the biggest bookshop that you can find and have a look on a shelf and find out where your book would sit. Well, if the bookshops are open, we can do that. But it's this idea of what's current and what's now and who's publishing in these areas. And so an opportunity like DSA, like other associations, affiliations, conferences, virtual meetups, hangouts, collaborations, co-authorships, partnerships, and such like, start to build that familiarity that you have with dealing with publishers, because you've spent all your time on your work. And now the challenge is to acquire a certain degree of knowledge as to how you're going to start connecting and get out there. And in the chat room this morning in the coffee area, some people were introducing themselves blind and saying, I've got an idea for a book. What do you think? Oh, it's fascinating, but you're really catching me on the back foot with that sort of thing. So think about which publisher you're working with and apply the knowledge. A common mistake that I often see in proposals is people bury the idea. They overwhelm the knowledge. They take 15 pages to account for the fact that they're an expert on this because they've been working 3, 5, 12 years on this project, on this, whatever it is. And they bury the knowledge. Put it up front. What is it that you know? What is it that you want other people to know? Put that in the first sentence. Tell us your findings. Okay, in the writing of the book, we'll have a big reveal in the final chapter. Woohoo, we built up to it. It's who done it. But this is proposal stage, and your audience is me and a couple of reviewers and an academic board. And we want to know who done it up front to see whether or not it's worth reading through the 80 or 100,000 words to get to that point. So knowledge, your knowledge, the expertise, fantastic. Your knowledge of publishers, that's what we want. Your knowledge, don't bury it. Tell us the findings up front. Come and see me at the booth and I'll answer as many questions as I can at the Q&A. Thank you very much.
So I'm Helena Hurd and I'm the books editor for Routledge Development Studies. So I suppose when you're entering the publishing landscape, it's pretty intimidating and, you know, do you publish an article? Do you publish a book? Who do you publish with? You know, Claire and Adam have talked to a couple of these things. And all I'd say is, you know, the advantage of publishing a book is that it's a much longer piece of work, so there's space to say more. If you want to say something short and sort of pithy and maybe based one chapter of your dissertation on a shorter piece of work, then a journal article is very suitable. If you want to publish something longer, that's maybe a consolidation of several years' work, then a book works really well. And the publishing landscape in development studies is not so big and scary because really the publishers who focus on development studies are the three publishers that you see here. Development studies is quite a small subject area, and so not many publishers publish development studies books very successfully, and when they do, it's often part of a bigger subject area, and they might not have as much familiarity with the field of development. So I think already, you know, use this opportunity of the DSA as the one opportunity in the year where you can really speak to the top books publishers in development studies, because there aren't other opportunities like this, and we all have our virtual exhibition space available through the timetable, with lots of discounts and other things available. So just plug that virtual exhibition space. We're there and we're open to talking to delegates and having conversations. So do come and see us, because it really is a pretty unprecedented opportunity, and it's the only time it happens in the year. So Routledge Development Studies, what's different about Routledge in comparison to Practical Action or OUP? I think that we felt a few years ago that publishing within development studies was often buried within academic disciplines and quite scattered, and it possibly wasn't serving the field of development studies fully as it bridges academia and practice. I think you know, development studies is very specific. It's not like other academic disciplines. You know, students haven't been studying it since they were 6 years old. It's something that they come to, you know, at undergraduate level, but often postgraduate level, master's level. So they come to it with some expectation of professional practice, the job at the end of it. And we felt that publishers weren't managing that academic practitioner interface particularly well, so we wanted to focus on development studies as a whole across practice and research. So that's where we came to it from. I would reiterate what Claire and Adam have said in their golden advice and common pitfalls. Know your audience, know what you're saying, and know what is new that you're putting forward. I think that PhD research often spends a lot of time sort of surveying the field and figuring out what other people have said, and laying the groundwork, and then getting to the point of what the researcher wants to add. And I would just say that a book allows you to sort of let loose from those constraints a little bit, and really put what you want to say and add to the field at the forefront. So I would encourage you to follow what is most interesting to you. So I thought that I might, instead of focusing on my voice, go to some of our authors. So hang on a moment, and I'll see if I can bring up.
Since development of any...
So this is what some of the authors who have published in the last year wanted to tell you as their bit of advice for thinking about publishing in development studies. And we've got the names of their books as well. So I'd encourage you to have a look at them if you find a title that sounds interesting to you.
Any given place or people is about the overall transformation and advancement of their society. Work hard to listen to how different groups address ideas of change and progress in their societies.
Focus on development trajectories, e.g. agriculture, industrialization, or on poverty and inequality due to economic, environmental, and other forms of social deprivation.
If you're editing a collection, be super strict with your authors about the deadlines. If you're totally inflexible, you'll get your chapters in on time.
Write something. The perfect chapter does not result from endless contemplation, but rather through writing and rewriting over and over again.
If you're turning your dissertation into a book, you don't have to include everything. Think about what you found most interesting or most important and create your story around that.
The writing process has its highs and lows, but from my experience, if you keep writing little by little, you'll finally complete that book.
Audience. There were so many different stakeholders involved in our volume. We wanted to make sure that it really kind of addressed both an academic audience, but also was of practical use to people working on the ground.
Do an open access publication. That way your book will be accessible to scholars, policymakers and practitioners all over the world.
Make sure that you have something new to say, preferably on anti-corruption, on integrity, on listening, and not just more on project management.
The manuscript by half in order to get to the book is what the editor said. So what I did is I converted the chapters into a collection of short stories so they read better, because the reader is important.
If you're an independent consultant and you'd like to write a book, you will often face a choice between writing the next chapter or taking on the next assignment. And the next chapter never wins until you no longer make that choice. And instead you make the overall decision to decline all invitations for assignments and focus on writing the book instead. Good luck.
Keep an overview of the whole book, because that allows you to focus on the details without risking getting lost.
Write every day, no matter how little, and don't check your email first thing in the morning.
Okay, so those are some tips from some of our authors, which I've collected in bullet points here. I think it comes down to knowing who your audience is and what you want to say. And I won't waste too much of everyone's time because I know we want to get to Q&A. But if you do want to have a conversation with me or our other publishing colleagues, then do come to the booth. I think there are various book launches happening this week, so do have a look at those. We're launching 2 books, Routledge Handbook of Migration and Development and Adventures in the Aid Trade. And for both of the book launches, we'll be doing a free draw for a free ebook, so worth coming if just for that. Thank you. I think maybe we'll do some Q&A now. So I'm not sure if Adam and Claire want to rejoin me on the podium. So I think if everyone could submit their questions via the question box rather than the text chat, as Sarah said, and we'll get to them one by one.
For OUP, you helpfully talked about contextualizing the author with the knowledge community. How do we go about... With me? Disappeared. How do you then submit a proposal and follow this advice? Ah, yes, joining the two up. Sorry, I wasn't transparent about that. The proposal, many routes. The proposal can come via a recommendation. So-and-so, who I happen to know, so-and-so suggested I want to contact you. So you've been talking to the people that you know, and they know the publishers, and that's a nice way. That's a meet and greet. That's an entry. How about your cover note mentions some of the authors that you've discussed this idea with? I was working this up, name drop a little bit. We know where you're coming from. You're associated in that area. How about your accompanying CV shows some co-authors of some papers or some chapters that you've worked on as well? We start to contextualize it then. It's that who are you and what qualifies you to write this that we've got evidence for. And having said all of that, how do you actually do it? Well, if you look on the, for example, on the DSA website, the new website, the brand new website, under the publications link, you'll see a link, for example, to the OUP DSA Development Studies series, and on there is a link to the proposal guidelines. And that's pretty standard for most publishers: the title, the author, a synopsis, your thoughts on readership, your extent, etc., table of contents. And that's on the DSA website now as a guideline for most publishers' proposals, even though that one was for the series specific. So multiple channels, and it's how you convey yourself, how you introduce yourself as someone that would fit with the sort of thing that any publisher would be interested in working on.
Okay, so do you accept book manuscripts based on a strongly revised PhD thesis? And can the underlying PhD thesis be placed in an institutional thesis repository? I think, well, I can only speak for Routledge here, but I would say yes, we do consider book manuscripts based on revised PhD theses. I would say you have to give a lot of thought to what is different about a book compared to a PhD thesis. A PhD thesis has to jump through lots and lots of hoops. It often involves a lot of lit review and detailed description of methodology just to prove that the researcher has gone about their research well. By the time they've passed their viva, they've proved that point. So you can strip out a lot of that. And most publishers will give advice on how to go about doing that and the sorts of changes that are needed to a PhD thesis. But I would say not all theses make for good books, and even if they are, even if it's an excellent PhD thesis, the sorts of things that we're looking for as publishers are whether it's saying something interesting to a wider research community. So we'd want authors to be engaging with a wider audience and community of scholars, and you know, to be thinking about who's going to read their book and what sort of thing they're going to be looking for. So in our case, yes, we do consider PhD thesis conversions. In terms of the specific question about the online repository, we'd have to ask about the specifics of the online repository. If it was something that was freely available to everyone, wherever they are in the world, then that kind of undermines the point of us publishing the book and expecting to make any money to cover our costs of publishing. But if it's something that is limited to the university, then sometimes there's some flexibility there. Claire and Adam, did you want to speak to that?
I'd just say that a PhD is, as I understand it, is an exercise in learning research skills. And usually a book is doing something slightly different. And as this is basically what Helena has been saying, that you have to demonstrate that you have those research skills, whereas somebody reading a book very often wants to get to the main point, your main findings right at the start, which wouldn't be right in a PhD. So there are a number of different ways in which a book and what it's doing is different from a PhD, and you need to address these and work out whether you can actually do that revision before you send it to a publisher.
I agree with both of those comments, and almost as a default, I say no. I'm not really interested in revised PhDs because I could spend my entire time coaching people on revising their PhDs. But the reality is we probably do 4 or 5 a year. They are seriously revised. They've taken on a life of their own. They're not within 12 months of approval. They're often 2, 3, 5 years worth of work, experience, teaching, further research, further information, and therefore using the original as a springboard, as it were. So it's an incarnation. With regards to institutional repositories, it's based exactly on what levels of restrictions there are that already exist. But there's also questions about if there was any funding involved, as in the researcher received some funding for it, and the funders have some stipulations with regards to repositories, open access. And this is the direction of travel for so many publishers nowadays. So I think we have to be flexible about it. But there is, as a university press, it's not that there is a commercial, it's just we can't lose on it. If we're going to invest in it, we've got to cover the cost of doing it. And so if the original version exists freely online, I wouldn't be wanting to publish that. I'd want the version from 5 years later, from 6 years later, and take it from there.
We have a question. Do I need permission from my institution if I'm turning my dissertation to a book? That's not something I've come across before as an institutional requirement. I would probably recommend that you approach your PhD supervisor and ask what they think. I suppose every institution is different, so there might be specific stipulations. But either way, it's worth discussing your publication plans with your PhD supervisor, because they're an expert and they'll be able to guide you and say whether you're going in the right direction or not.
Are there author costs getting a book published? I'll just give a comment on that. There need not be any author costs except for your time, which is very considerable. If the publisher considers that there is going to be plenty of sales from this book, print sales or sales of the PDF, the online version, sufficient to cover all of their production costs, then we certainly don't make any charges. However, if it's important for you that the book should be open access, that was one of the recommendations of Helena's authors, then usually a publisher will make a charge, which might be covered by your institution, because of the foregone print sales if a book is open access. So there may be a charge then, but generally speaking, other costs are borne by the publisher, who will only take a book on if they think that the book will sell enough to cover its costs.
Yes, the traditional publishing model involves publishers putting their money up front to copy edit and typeset and generally prepare the book for publication with the expectation that then they're going to sell books that will recoup those costs. So the open access movement just takes those costs of publication, and because the publishers are no longer selling the book for money at the end in the same way, those costs come up front. I would say be very wary of publishers that ask for upfront fees to publish who are not involved in open access, because then it becomes a case of vanity publishing and you have to wonder about what they're looking to achieve from their authors. So I would be wary. I'm just going to put this one up because I think we didn't answer it fully. Does the manuscript title need to be different from the thesis title, even if it appears to fit the publisher's title style? I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be different from the thesis title, but it almost invariably is, because a thesis is doing something different. It's setting up a question to explore. It comes back to what we were saying about the difference between what a thesis does and what a book does. I tend to say that a thesis starts with a question and works its way to the answer, whereas a book starts with the answer. It starts with what the researcher wants to contribute to the field, and then evidences it over the course of the book. So a thesis title will often be quite lengthy and it will often involve a question, whereas a book title is often quite assertive. So talk to your publisher about what they're recommending. We wouldn't change it just for the sake of it, but it would be very rare for it not to be a bit different.
I think another key here is discoverability. It does what it says on the tin, and it answers a question. This is everything a thesis has. In the online world nowadays, and even in the old library catalogues, someone sitting in front of a computer, as we all are, is typing in a question that they want answered. And your book is seeking, your chapter, your book is seeking to answer their question. And so you have to have the right words, the right keywords, the right metadata, and all of these additional things that publishers add to the process as well nowadays to reveal your work at the top of the search engine rankings. You know, it's the discoverability factor. You've got the right words in the title, you've got the right words in the abstract. And so these aren't thoughts that you would have had in answering the PhD question. These are the things that publishers will bring to it in order to make it discoverable and get it in front of people who are interested in that topic.
Basically getting it onto the first page of Google rather than page 20.
Yeah.
And to do this question from Richard Holloway, who's the author of our book Adventures in the Aid Trade, where we've got the book launch on Thursday, so come along to that, small plug. If I'm writing not for an academic audience, but for a hoped-for readership based in active development organisations, do you have any different advice? I've talked a lot, so maybe that's one for Claire.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly. I mean, most staff in development organisations have gone through university, so let's not be patronising. But at the same time, that I'm told the whole time by my colleagues in development organisations, we haven't got time to wade through a long, a long book to get to the reveal. So, and I think that you need to make sure that that the point of what you're writing is upfront. You need to write in quite short sentences. I mean, I would say that that's a good rule anyway. Try not to be too long-winded. Try not to use jargon too much unless you are in a very specific field in which the jargon is all understood. I think all of those would be good guidelines for writing to a development audience?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, I think ultimately you have to just imagine that you're having a conversation with the reader. How would you talk to a practitioner differently to how you would talk to a researcher? What are the different points in your research that you'd want to bring out, and in your arguments that you want to bring out? And bear in mind that practitioner audience is going to want practical advice that they can apply to their organizations. So I think researchers often are wary of saying this is what you should do in this situation, because each situation is different. But when writing for practitioners, I think you sort of do need to put yourself in that position a little bit to give them answers that they can apply. So can you publish your dissertation in a book even after publishing a couple of papers from the same thesis? Does anyone else want to take that one?
I think it comes back to the idea of the dissertation. Personally, we're not publishing the dissertation. We're publishing something that is a product of, with additional research, additional experience, additional. So I was listening in on the journals thing, and they said, please don't send us a chapter from the dissertation and put an abstract on it and expect us to publish it in the journal. So they're requiring it to be reworked for that journal. If you're trying to get the same sort of length, you're not going to have an entire chapter, which is the literature review. Chapter 2 or chapter 3, the literature review. The structure is different. You're going to have to rework it anyway. If some of it's appeared elsewhere, that's okay. With it being online nowadays, librarians, I'm told, don't like refried beans. You know, I've read this before somewhere. This was part of an article that came out last year, and now it's a chapter in a book. So to be fair to people, you have to bring something original, even if it's based on previous writings, experiences, field studies, data, whatever it is. There has to be a different type of readership in mind for each thing. A readership for the dissertation, a readership specific for journal articles, and a readership for the book. And therefore it will change if you bear that in mind.
I'd agree with that, and just say do have a conversation with your editor about the specifics, because each project is different. Each book is different, and so what might be appropriate to one might not be appropriate to the other. So have a conversation. We're here precisely to have those sorts of conversations this week. So the question is, how considerable would the time be on converting a PhD to a book, and what sort of timescale would you expect for a book? Is there a limit on years after the thesis was finished? Adam's spoken a little bit to that in terms of timescale. I would say that each book is different. I think most theses do require quite a lot of revision and time spent on them, because a thesis is written for the examiners and a book is written for a wider audience. So therefore, you're going to have to revise it a little bit. But each book is very, very different, and each thesis is very, very different, and sometimes more time is required than others. When the book publishes, it needs to be relevant to the moment that it's publishing in right that moment. So, if the PhD research happened 5 or 10 years ago, then it's going to be less relevant to the audience of readers now, and therefore, you might want to consider doing further field work, as Adam said, building on what you've worked on for the PhD research, and bringing the work up to date and rethinking it. So I would say personally, for me, there isn't a limit in that you can publish a book that builds on 20 years of research, or 50 years of research, but it needs to bring it right up to date as well. So by all means, draw on insights from further back, but put them in the current context.
Back in 1983, OUP published Camilla Tourmalin's revised dissertation, a study of a village in Mali in the Western Sahel. And 2 months ago, we published an updated version of it. 35 years later, she'd been in touch, she'd gone back. It's launching this week on the IED website on Wednesday afternoon, if anyone wants a break from DSA. But it's this like 35 years worth of study. I mean, the other example might be Nick Stern's work on Palampur. 60 years of study of data on the Indian village, over 3 volumes, one every 2 decades. Started off as a bunch of students and their field notes, etc. And now it's Nick Stern going back and heading up this international team to revisit the families and the villages and look at the data and establish the teams, and they've brought it all along themselves. So yeah, from a small dissertation or an original idea, you may still have a book contract 35, 40, 50 years later to keep delivering on iterations of it. So there's hope, and I'm not putting a time frame on anything.
Potential authors are encouraged to ask publishers weeks prior to a conference whether they can speak to them. If one hasn't done this, can one still talk to you / introduce ourselves?
Yes.
I think that's a unanimous yes. Please do talk to us. We're here for the duration of the conference. Speaking for myself, there's actually a button on the Routledge exhibition space where you can book a slot to speak to me. And there are slots this week and next week. So if it's all too much during the conference, then there are opportunities beyond that as well.
Yeah. From me too, yeah, please do come and chat. As I think Helen Rand, what's your name? Adam, have said, sorry, Adam, how just to be able to chat rather than anything very formal. It's prior to the proposal stage, and we'd love to speak to you. I mean, it's not quite the same as being there in person. And so, it's quite quiet at the moment on our stall, and we'd love to speak to you.
Okay, I'm aware that we don't have much time left. Let me just publish this one. How long does it take before a work is published, and can the speakers please share their emails again?
So we have a guideline that our production schedule from delivery to publication is 8 months. It doesn't take 8 months, but we say it's 8 months. Partly this is because we, with our reputation, as it were, are required to enter book data, library catalogue classification, etc., announce the book to the trade 6 months before it's published. So we need the manuscript in, we need to make sure we're going ahead with it, we need to make sure everything's okay, and then we can announce it. It doesn't take 8 months to produce a book, but there are multiple things that go on alongside that. So as a general rule, 8 months.
With us, it's 5 to 6. Sometimes it's more depending on the length of the book. But I think a common misconception is that it can take a long time to publish a book, whereas journal publication is quite quick. And it's often entirely different. I think often it's quicker to publish a book nowadays than to get into a journal, because we have no constraints on the number of books that we can publish if it's produced to a good standard, of course.
Yeah, for us it's 6 months too. And basically what we want to be able to do is to send details, as Adam said, to the bibliographic agencies, so that before your book is actually published, there is news in America and all the way through Waterstone's, Amazon, that the book is coming. So you can build up a head of steam for it. So, I mean, sometimes there are circumstances where we can get a book done in less than 6 months. for a particular conference, but generally 6 months and sometimes a little bit longer is the guiding rule.
Mm-hmm.
For our email addresses, I'm not sure how we could do that with the constraints with the podiums, but all of our names are in the program, and I believe that we should be there as authors as well, even though we're not authors, and that allows for you to send an email to us and that'll reach us directly, or you can just Google our names and our email addresses will come up. Alternatively, I think all of us will have our email addresses posted on the exhibition booth space, so another plea to come and see us there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we're officially out of time, so if people do want to head off, that's entirely fine. Obviously, feel free to do so. Do contact us separately if you would like to. But I think that some of us, well, I'm happy to stay around and answer further questions. I'm not sure if Claire and Adam are free to do the same.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So, how much of a profile do you expect early career researcher authors to have, e.g. number of articles written, etc.? I think the most important thing for me is the idea and the book and the viability of the book. It helps for an early career researcher to have some publications because of the experience that gives them in setting their ideas forward and the feedback that that's going to give them as well. So I think it's helpful for the early career researcher, but it's not something that would necessarily put me off entirely if I thought that the book was excellent coming through to me. I would say, though, that it's quite rare for a book to come through that is excellent where the researcher hasn't also already published a couple of articles.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I mean, we've got the great thing of an early career researcher from a publisher's point of view is if you make friends with them and build up that relationship at that point, then they may come back to you and bring their future books. So we welcome those people, but and in fact, there's a book that we're publishing in a few days' time that we're launching tomorrow, Living on Little by Julie Zollman, who's quite an early career researcher, and you can tell immediately, it was apparent from her proposal that she was a very good writer, that she had a good idea, and she had published before, but only a few journal articles, but you don't have to have a huge profile.
I think we're counting profile as in number of, I mean, it says example number of articles, but it comes back to who are you and what qualifies you to write on this topic? Yeah, and if that qualification is articles published or all the rest of it, absolutely fantastic. If that's the level of data that you've got access to and you're all over it and you've got some great findings, that's fantastic. So who are you and what qualifies you to write on this? And if that kind of resonates, because we don't know everybody. And so when you introduce yourself, we want to know who you are and what it is that you can bring. You know, it's that introduction that you need to make for yourself. So looking at where you've published, who you've published with, the number that you've published, there are certain things that will definitely count against you. If you've published in certain fields and now you've completely shifted in direction, people wouldn't recognize you for that. But at this stage for early career, everyone's got to start somewhere. So that's why I work with the networks as much as anything. And you get recommendations, you hear about interesting ideas and interesting people.
Okay, going to do this one. Is it okay to submit a proposal to multiple publishers, provided that is done so transparently, or would that just put you off?
To be fair, it puts me off. I think one of the values that we can bring as a publisher, as a university press, is the review process. And especially over the last few months, those reviews have slowed down in some cases quite a lot, as reviewers' capacities and everything have been affected. But one of the strengths that I think we can offer specifically is that review process, is that engagement in the review process. I heard something similar as well on the journals panel, where you may end up with 3, 4, 5 reviews, and they might not all agree with each other, but it's then for you and the editor to work out the direction it's going to take. And this is work. This is quite a lot of work. And there are certain other publishers out there which, if I got wind that you'd sent the proposal to them, I could pretty much guarantee they'll find 2 friendly people who'll send them a paragraph, approve it, and they'll have an offer on the table within a fortnight to you. And therefore, what are you going to take? Another 2 months, 3 months of me waiting to get a review, probably with some extra work on it, or what I guess is going to be an offer of a contract for you from someone else, which, good luck to you, well done, congratulations, but I don't really want to play that game. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a tricky one. I understand all the pressures that are on early career researchers to publish quickly. I think that if you select the publisher that works best for the book that you want to put forward, then invest the time in that relationship. Odds are that we're going to be approaching quite similar reviewers. And so you will be found out if you approach multiple publishers, and it's really frustrating when a reviewer comes back to you and says, actually, this has been sent to me by 2 other publishers. That's a waste of the reviewer's time, and it's a waste of the publisher's time, and it does make us a bit miffed. Having said that, if you are going to do it, then honesty is better than trying to do it under the radar. So do tell us if you have particular constraints on you, or if you're trying to consider which publisher will be the best fit for your work, and we'll happily have those conversations.
Yeah, fair enough. I'd agree with you. I mean, just bear in mind that those early stages, the reviews, the discussions that go backwards and forwards about the way we work, they do all take up time. They are work. Either of a reviewer or ourselves. I mean, even worse is when you go far down the road, and then we had one person who decided that they were going to self-publish with their organization, and that was after a great deal of work and some free advice from their point of view from our reviewer. So yes, prefer to do it in good faith and one organization at a time, one publisher at a time.
I think we are all sympathetic to the pressures on early career researchers, though, so it's fine. It's absolutely fair enough to ask the question, and by all means have those conversations with us. Okay, is it beneficial or detrimental to have, say, 2 chapters out of the book published as journal articles prior to submitting proposal, and vice versa? Can papers be submitted out of the published book? I think Adam's already talked to this a little bit. I think a journal article is often trying to do a different thing to a book chapter. I mean, ultimately, as publishers, we want to be sure that people are going to buy the book, and if it's cannibalized by sort of extracting chapters and publishing them elsewhere, or trying to put them freely available or within journals, then the more that happens, the more the market for the book is compromised. So I think we as publishers do balance all of these things carefully to figure out what the best way forward is. But speaking for myself, if it's 1 or 2 chapters that is revised for a journal, then that can work, but it's something we consider carefully, case by case.
I think you'll also find quite a lot of... Sorry, Claire.
Well, I was just going to say, and certainly putting some of your ideas in a blog can be actually very complementary to the book. It can interest people and get them to engage and buy the book.
I think you'll find most journals are not interested in refried beans out of books. It's more common that books include things that have had an iteration in a journal, but it doesn't cross over very well the other way at all. Journals want the truly original, concise content. I see we've got a raised hand as well, Helena.
Yes, let's
experiment.
Yeah, okay. Does anyone else want to answer this one?
Okay, yes.
What about late career researchers?
Late career researchers. Well, of course, late career researchers bring a lot of experience. They can see the whole context. They can see when ideas have come around full circle and are being trotted out again. And so I think that, yes, of course, they are very welcome to submit proposals, especially if they are, if they are aimed at practitioners and are showing people the way to do things most effectively from their experience over the years, then that's fantastic.
I think if I tie this back to the questioner's earlier one as well about academic publications and practitioner publications and things like that. I didn't comment on the previous one because as a university press, our home is in the academic and we don't really do a lot of the practitioner side of things at all. And what I found is quite a lot of the later career researchers, and we're calling them researchers, are often people who have worked through the ranks of various development agencies, this, that, and the other, and think they've got a story to tell. And some of them are absolutely fascinating, but rather than being a calling card for their consultancy, which is often what they're looking for, buy my book and I will come and advise you, and this is my experience. It will accompany the presentations that I make and such like. I'm always looking for that original academic contribution as well that will resonate. And I think over a period of many years, a lot of the researchers, later career researchers, etc., have experienced shifts and trends in development thinking that they can bring and reflect on as well. And that works really rather well. We've done some on VAT reform in Africa over the last 20 years, written by a development consultant. We did Brian Pinto's book, formerly the country economist at the World Bank, upon his retirement, capturing the lessons and how they changed. That he was being parachuted in from Washington to various countries to reel out these expressions of policy and advice and theory. And he was thinking, this isn't going to work at all because this is a theory that worked there and didn't work there. And he waited until he retired, and then yeah, that was his show it all, but it engaged with the literature and it built upon it. So there's some rich storytelling to be told there, and some of it's quite it brings a very unique perspective to the subject areas.
I think that late career researchers are often better placed than most to write something that's of book length. 80,000, 90,000, 100,000 words is quite a lot to take on. And if you have the benefit of decades of experience, either within research or within practice, then you have an awful lot more to draw on than an early career researcher. So in terms of specific tips for later career researchers, I would maybe say, what are the pressing questions that have been bothering you for years, and what do you want to bring out that are the problems that keep coming up again and again? Why are those problems not being solved within practice or within research? What, as Adam says, what are the trends that you've seen, and how can you reflect on them critically and interestingly? Development is an industry that has a reputation for not learning from its mistakes often, and later career researchers can really contribute a lot in that regard, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Any guidelines on book length?
Well, how long is a piece of string? Yes. We always say that if you're going to sell a book, it probably needs a spine, or it might be ring back, but and then it needs to be possibly 35,000 words as a minimum. But obviously, depending on the subject, and it really does depend. I mean, if you are on a very, very specific subject, and you are quite a niche area, and you're still aiming this but practitioners in a practical, practical book. I'm just thinking about one in particular that's come to us recently. Will a practitioner want to be reading 110,000 words on a very, very niche area? 110,000 words is probably about 300 pages or 320 pages, something like that. So, whereas if it's perhaps an edited collection with a lot of people bringing their different insights and case studies, then that, over 100,000 words might be more acceptable. So I would say books normally start at 30 to 35,000 words, and for us, I'd be loath to take much that is over 120,000 words, but even so, it really is a case of how long is a piece of string.
My minimum, I think, comfortable would be about 65,000 words. I think because of the increase in electronic and online, I've always been friendly to edited volumes as well, where you're dipping in and reading individual chapters. I think where you don't have the word restraints of a journal of 7,000 or 8,000 words, you can have chapters of 8,000 to 10,000 words. You need enough chapters to be able to tell your story, whatever it is, to reveal your findings. So I think 6, 7 chapters at 9,000, 10,000 words is, looking at my comfort. I have absolutely no problems with 250,000 words if that's what it takes to tell a fantastic story. It's been done before. But in that particular case, well, in that one case I have in mind, that was cut down considerably to get to that length as well. So it's often a matter of writing more and then editing to less. And so having a lower floor is useful. But I would say that the hardest thing often is just writing it in the first place and then shaping it, whatever the work is, into the structures you want, dividing it up into chapters of approximate lengths to tell it, dividing it up into sections of the book, into manageable chunks, if this isn't going to be a book that's read cover to cover. And I think you'll end up more in the region of about 80 to 90,000 words. But big books don't scare me. And they're online anyway, so I don't know what this spine is that you talk of.
I would say that one of the nice things about working in books publishing, and probably the reason that we're all working in books publishing rather than journals publishing, is that each book is its own unique adventure, its own different product. So what Adam says about sometimes if it's a fantastic idea that needs 250,000 words, then we publish it. Yes, because that's what the idea needs. But I think that publishers have tried varying approaches to try to match the diversity that's required from authors out there. So I think most books end up between 80,000 and 90,000 words. A few years ago, there was a sort of feeling that there was a need for longer publications that surveyed the field. And those are research handbooks. So if someone wanted to find out, everything they need to know about a particular subject, either they have to look through the last 20 years of a specific journal, or they have to read a 90,000 word book. Neither of those is appropriate. Publishers, and I think Oxford was the first, started producing research handbooks, which were a lot longer, typically 250,000 words, can be longer to survey the field properly. So that's one way that publishers adapted to the need for longer publications. Then Palgrave came along and sort of said, well, what about authors who want to write something that's a little bit longer than a journal article, but a little bit shorter than a book? And they invented the Palgrave pivot model, which is a shorter form publication for books between 30,000 and 50,000 words. Lots of publishers have done that as well, and Routledge has done that. So we have a model called Routledge Focus for books that are under 50,000 words, but over 30,000 words. But having said that, with all these adaptations in mind, most books still do end up between 80 and 90,000 words. So I think go to a publisher and say, this is my project, this is how long I think I need to do it justice, and we'll work with you. So if you did want to put a question forward, do so now, or you'll lose the opportunity in this session. But I want to reiterate, please do come and talk to us, have a look at our stands. I think we all have discounts going on, and support the work of your fellow scholars by looking at their books as well, as considering your own publications.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Adam, did you want to add anything before?
No, I should get off.
For keeping it all together. Fantastic work. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Helena.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.